It all started when my husband decided to buy a house. Firstly, there is clean air outside the city, and secondly, I always wanted this. Fishing on the lake, mushrooms and berries in the forest. He rolled his eyes dreamily. Yeah, and 40 acres of vegetable garden. I laughed. We can handle it. Let's think about everything carefully again. But she knew, once he had made up his mind, it was impossible to knock him out of his thoughts. Soon the table in the room was littered with newspapers, with advertisements for the sale and purchase of real estate. During the first time of our search, all the offers were not suitable. Either the terrain was wrong, or the layout, or the access was bad, or the price was exorbitant. When Igor was already despairing of finding something suitable, the phone rang. Some unknown man asked if we still wanted to buy the estate. Tell me, are you the owner? I clarified. I am their relative. Distant. No, that won't work. We do not want to buy from a middleman. Do not worry. Everything is in order with the documents. It's just that my aunt, he hesitated a little, is currently abroad for treatment. That's why she entrusted me with the business. I don't know why, but I didn't want to deal with this quite pleasant young man. But Igor finally persuaded me. When they saw the house, the husband almost jumped for joy. Darling, look how beautiful it is. Dream. The place was truly picturesque. The house was located at the end of the street. To the right there was a forest. To the left there was a meadow, behind which there was a river. What year was the building built? I asked busily. Old. Still pre-war. So maybe it's already rotten through and through. No, what are you talking about? It was lined with white brick and the ceilings were repaired. Let's go inside and see for yourself. I didn't even want to go in, but Igor, can you really argue with him? Who lives in that house over there? After all, as they say, you don't buy a house, you buy neighbors. The two nearest houses are also for sale. The children took their elderly parents with them. Baba Maria lives at the very end of the street. Honestly, she's an abnormal old lady, but you won't even have to walk past her. From the house through the meadow there is a road to the bridge and exit to the highway. And what nature is around. This is paradise for kids. Noticing how the husband pulled the man's hand, like, shut your mouth. But it was too late. The mood was ruined. We really wanted children. Both Igor and I are healthy, but the doctors just shrugged. Unfortunately, this happens. There is some incompatibility. We have already lost all hope. In short, 2 months later we moved into a new house. Igor was beside himself with joy. After some time, strange and rather frightening things began to happen to us. It all started when I started waking up at night from the sound of someone opening the curtains in the room. And in fact, when she stood up to see what was happening, she screamed in surprise. I was literally speechless. The curtains were open, but I remembered perfectly well that I closed them with my own hands. At first I thought that my husband was making fun of me, but this also happened when he was on the night shift, or snoring peacefully next to me. Furthermore, Igor, why did you turn on the empty kettle? Apparently, she turned it on herself, or accidentally hit the button. Often in the evenings, the doors of the kitchen cabinets, with a disgusting creak, although they were lubricated, would swing open on their own. I don't like all this. I complained to my husband. Karina, don't make a mountain out of a mountain. Everything is fine. You're just not used to it yet. In a new place something like this often begins to seem. We need the house to accept us. Igor, to be honest, at some point I began to get pretty irritated by my wife's behavior. This and that weren't right for her. I didn't want to make a scandal, but how long can you listen to complaints? One day my sister came to visit us with her husband and her kids. Petka was 5 years old, and Kityuka was 9. They frolicked with pleasure in the yard while their relatives prepared barbecue and cooked fish soup from the fish I caught with my own hands. At 9 they put the children to bed, and they themselves continued to rest to the fullest. We went to bed long after midnight. My wife and I are on the first floor. Our nephews are in the room next to us, and my sister and her husband are on the second. My wife joked, Leska, so be it. You and Mishka will sleep separately. It's a honeymoon after all. The fact is that my sister's husband just returned from a long business trip, and they, like newlyweds, could not stop admiring each other. In my sleep I heard Petya paddling his bare feet to the toilet. Then the boy screamed in fear and ran into our room. Uncle Igor, there, some kind of ant. What did you come up with? I'm telling you exactly. Come on, I'll show her to you. She's in the mirror. Of course, we didn't see anyone, and I didn't believe Petka. The kid was fantasizing, that's all. I decided not to tell anyone about the night incident, and persuaded my nephew that this was our secret. One day Karina came running home, pale and frightened. Where were you? I decided to walk to the end of the street, and that old woman began to beckon me. I'm afraid of her. So there's no point in wandering around there. I got angry, and after a while something happened that turned our whole lives upside down. I decided to build a guest house in the yard. Hired a team of workers from the region too. Everything was of the highest standard, but I was damned to help them. He fell down from a 3-meter height. The doctor's verdict: a broken spine, a wheelchair, and no guarantees that I will ever be able to get back on my feet. Karen and I still remember with horror the day my loved one was diagnosed. At that moment, he aged 100 years, hunched over, turned pale, and his eyes dimmed. Don't worry, we will fight, I reassured him. Go away, I need to be alone, he answered quietly. From that moment on, our life was divided into 2 parts, before and after. Igor became irritable, scandalous, stubborn, and angry. I tried not to show how hard it was for me with him. I controlled myself. I didn't break out into a scream, and only in the evenings, when I went up to my room, my husband refused to sleep with me. I could give free rein to my tears, and yet, my best sedative at that time was alcohol. A glass, 2, 3, and it became easier. Over time, I no longer limited myself to the green serpent. I understood that I was drinking alone, but I couldn't stop. This is the only thing left for me. She calmed herself down. One day I persuaded my husband to go for a walk. He grumbled for a long time, but agreed. We walked, wrong. I carried him in a wheelchair along the street, and she herself didn't notice how she ended up near that old woman's house. She was sitting on the porch and again waved her hand at me. Come here. Igor didn't notice anything, and I hastened to retreat. I don't know why, but Baba Maria aroused animal fear in me. That evening I saw with my own eyes a woman's silhouette in the mirror. I couldn't make out her face. I only noticed that the stranger was pale. Her hair was loose over her shoulders. She was dressed strangely. He didn't tell Karina anything. Why scare her? She's having a hard time already. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time, and at dawn I made a decision. Why live as an immobilized cripple? Why torture the woman you love? She will cry, calm down, and arrange her life. Tomorrow, when my wife is not at home, I'll take the pills and fall into eternal sleep. Fortunately, as a doctor, I know which ones. The next day, after another meeting with the old woman, I went out into the yard. My husband was still sleeping. A hoarse voice came from behind. If the mountain does not go to Mohammed. She looked around and was stunned. In the courtyard stood an old woman, hunched over, all in black. Well, a witch, and that's all. What you need? I stammered. I called you twice, and you didn't listen. I came to guide you on the true path. Open your eyes. I'll sit here on the bench, and you run into the house. You can still stop him. And then you take your husband out into the yard. Let's talk. Thank God I rushed in time. Igor did not have time to poison himself. How could you? I didn't mean to torment you. I love you, and together we will survive everything. How did you know that I wanted? Igor asked his neighbor. Who cares? I know, that's all. You need to run away from here, as soon as possible, otherwise everything is lost. You speak in riddles. Before the war, I had a sister, Angelina. Beautiful, not like I'm hunchbacked. Baba Maria smiled sadly. One of the villagers had his eye on Julia, but she didn't like him. She loved another guy, but her parents forced her to marry him. This house was built for them, but Angelina did not accept her fate, went up to the attic, and hanged herself, and most likely, she cursed this house. Since then, he has taken revenge on everyone living in it. The previous owners also ended badly. He worked at a construction site in the city, fell from the roof, and remained crippled. His wife drank herself to death. She sighed and added, and you run. If not yourself, then at least have pity on your child. We don't have a child, I muttered in confusion. It will be. The old woman smiled for the first time. We called the local priest, consecrated the house so that it would not cause anyone more grief, and then sold it. And a year later I gave birth to a girl. We named her Masha, in honor of Baba Maria, who saved our family. We moved to a new house a few months ago. During the process of buying a house, the person who was selling the house died unexpectedly at the age of about 40 years. He died right in the middle of the living room. This did not interfere with the sale. The documents were signed, and soon we moved into this house. And then the fun began. Literally, on the day of moving, our 2-year-old daughter began talking about a ghost that lives within these walls. If you think logically, my daughter is only 2 years old, and at this age children are very impressionable. Plus, Halloween had recently passed, and she also had a book about Halloween with pictures that she loved to look at. So it's quite possible that all this talk about ghosts was the result of flipping through the book. However, she talked about the ghost constantly, that he was in her basement playhouse, that he was on the stairs, that a ghost was standing in the corner. She seemed not to be afraid of him. Rather, I considered her a friend, so it didn't bother me. Even if there was a ghost, it did not threaten the family in any way. I often told this ghost that he could stay as long as he wanted. At the same time, he added that he could leave if it would make him happier. I was 30% sure that there was some kind of ghost in the house. Until the day when we hurriedly got ready in the morning to take our daughter to the garden. It was still dark outside and raining. My daughter came up to me and said that the ghost was now in the backyard. And then she said that today was his birthday and she wanted to sing him a song. I didn't pay attention to it again. We sang a song to the ghost, wished him luck, and went about our business. That evening, out of pure curiosity, really, I looked at the biography of the man who died in our house. Have you already guessed? It was his birthday. My name is Vlad. I live with my parents and my younger sister in an old 5-story building on the 2nd floor. After the birth of Sophia, my sister, we decided to sell our old apartment and buy a new one. Fortunately, in addition to the money from the old apartment, we still had maternity capitale, was looking for an apartment because my parents worked hard to provide for their family. After a few days of searching, I came across one good apartment, which was located on the 2nd floor of a 5-story building. But unlike our apartment, it was a new building. After showing the ad to my parents, the general counsel decided to call and agree on what day we could look at the apartment. My father called the number indicated in the ad, a sweet, judging by her voice, girl introduced herself to him, and she explained that she was currently traveling, and if we wanted to see the apartment, we should go to her neighbor on the floor, who lives opposite. My father agreed that we would arrive this Sunday, closer to 12 noon, and asked the girl to warn the neighbor about our visit. Vika, this is how this girl introduced herself, said that her neighbor Aunt Tanya would be waiting for us that Jason Day finally arrived. We got up in the morning, had breakfast, and gathered our sister, and we went to look around the apartment. To make it clearer, this apartment was ideal for our price. They asked for exactly the same amount that we would have received from the sale of the old apartment and maternity capital. The apartment itself was in excellent condition, which was surprising for its low price. Arriving at the address, we saw a fairly new 5-story building. There were no cars in the yard, as Vika, the owner of the apartment, said. Mostly pensioners live here. They don't have cars. Only sometimes relatives come to visit them, having gone up to the 2nd floor and ringing the doorbell of neighbor Vicky. A pretty old lady opened the door for us and, without letting a word be said, in a quiet voice asked, "Are you the new tenants of my neighbor? Here are the keys. When you finish examining the apartment, put the keys in my mailbox. I'll pick them up later," and immediately closed the door in front of us. It seemed strange to me. Her quiet and pretty voice sounded too artificial. Her face was too unnaturally kind. But having decided to attribute this to her advanced age, I threw these thoughts out of my head. I want to clarify that there was no light on the floor, and the window from which light could leak was covered with several thick layers of newspaper. But why? It was now the middle of summer. What was the point of completely sealing the window? While I was thinking about this, my parents opened the door and entered the apartment. I followed them and closed the door behind me out of habit. The apartment was pitch dark. The switch did not work and there was no light in the corridor. Then my parents walked forward and entered to the kitchen, as we find out in a couple of seconds, and turned on a light there. A bright beam of light bulb illuminated the kitchen and part of the corridor. Everything really looked like in the photograph. New renovation, new furniture. Only apparently there was something wrong with the wiring, or the light bulb had burned out. Upon entering the apartment, we immediately saw a straight corridor in front of us. The kitchen was on the right side, almost at the very end of the corridor. In front of it there was another room, but the door to it was closed. On the left side there was a separate shower room, toilet, and storage room. Opposite the front door, at the end of the corridor, there was a hall. My parents were in the kitchen and examined everything there. I felt somehow uneasy at this time. The whole apartment looked so well groomed, although Vika said that no one had lived there for a long time. My sister suddenly shouted, "Look," and ran forward along the dark corridor, running into the hall. Not a single ray of light entered the hall. It was pitch black. Not knowing what to do, I followed my sister, but I was stopped by some sound. Although wait, it's not a sound, it's a child's voice. The voice of my younger sister. It was coming from the bathroom. But how can this be? I saw with my own eyes how she ran into the hall. I go into the bathroom. There was no one there. Sink, shower stall, bathtub, and a voice. The quiet voice of my sister, who whispers, "Help me." I start turning around, looking for where the sound is coming from. Finally, I was able to make out that it was coming from under the bathtub, which stood on some kind of high stand. I looked under it. There was a child sitting in a dark corner, but it was not my sister. It was a 2-year-old baby. I took him in my arms and went out into the corridor. Where did the child come from here? Vika didn't say a word about children. There was no way he could get here. The door was closed, and that grandmother didn't say a word about it, although maybe she forgot to tell us that her grandson was here. But why is he here alone? While I was thinking about this, I heard a laugh in my head. I didn't understand where the sound came from, but it was nearby. Then another one, and another. I held the child so that his head was next to mine. I take the child from my breast. Oh my God. Another laugh came from this child, but his mouth did not open. He laughed with his mouth closed, and then he opened his mouth. I saw strange teeth that were pointed in some places. His eyes sparkled in the darkness. Cat. It was illuminated by dim light from the kitchen. This creature asked in a rough, not at all childish voice, "Have you come to feed me?" At the same time, turning my head to the side, baring my sharp teeth in a terrible smile, I began to panic. I stood still without moving, but I understood that something had to be done. This creature has not yet taken any action. I decided to take a risk, quickly flew into the bathroom, put the child there, and jumped out as quickly as possible, closing the door behind me. Only 2 thoughts were spinning in my head. I need to pick up my sister and parents and quickly get out of here. Turning on the flashlight on my phone, I ran towards the hall to pick up my sister. Running past the kitchen, I shouted to my parents, "Let's run from here." They stood and looked at something in the window. I ran into the hall, illuminating the room with a flashlight. I saw my sister. She was standing and looking at a picture hanging on the wall, which depicted some kind of deity. He had the same shine in his eyes and fangs as that child I found taking my sister in my arms. I ran to the kitchen. Entering there, my parents also stood and looked out the window. I shouted at them, saying, "Let's get out of here, quickly," but they didn't react to this in any way. Then I came closer to them. God, they had no pupils. Their eyes were completely white, covered with some kind of film. I stepped back and automatically looked at my sister. Instead of my sister, in her clothes was the child I found in the bathroom. I threw this creature on the floor and rushed out of the apartment. Having gone out into the entrance, I was about to run outside, but I rang the doorbell of the old woman who gave us the keys. Maybe she knows what's going on. She opened it to me, and again, without letting me say a word, she asked, "Have you come to feed me?" I stumbled back and slammed the door right in the old woman's face. Turning back, I almost fainted. My parents. They stood in front of me and looked at me with their empty eyes. In their arms was that creature in the body of a child. They all began to speak in unison. "Have you come to feed us?" I don't remember how I was able to escape, how I ran out into the entrance and found myself already on the street where there were a lot of people. From fear, I could not catch my breath. My heart was beating wildly. I stood bent over, holding my heart. When I stood up, I saw that all the passers-by were looking at me. They had no pupils. Their empty eyes looked in my direction. Their mouths opened, and there was a choir everywhere. A choir of voices that repeated only one thing, only one question. "Have you come to feed us?" I woke up, covered in sweat. My heart was beating fast. God, it was just a dream. Just a terrible dream. Only we really had to look at this apartment today. Okay, it was just a dream. Nothing more. We arrived at the address. The father said that the owner would not come and gave the keys to his neighbor. He asked me to pick up the keys while they changed my sister, who got seasick on the road. I went up to the second floor and rang the doorbell, whose number my father told me. An old woman opened the door for me. Her head was turned to the side. She smiled sweetly, bared her sharp teeth, and asked, "Have you come to feed me?" This question echoed in my head. I turned around. My parents stood there, looked at me with empty eyes, and repeated the same question. "Have you come to feed us?" I was 15. My second cousin was 16. The house that his father built was at the stage of walls. The basement floor was already ready. The floorboards were rough, with considerable gaps between them. The passage to the ground floor was closed by an old street door, very heavy. We climbed in there with the neighbor girls and a battery-powered tape recorder. Didn't drink, didn't smoke. Summer, 7 o'clock in the evening. At some point, the music ended, and we heard someone approaching the gate from the street side. Then the folded hut jingled, and we heard footsteps, a heavy man's gait. We hid. Then this someone came into the house and went through the rooms. We heard footsteps, but through the cracks in the floor we could see that there was no one in the house. Then the footsteps started to leave. We rushed to the vents in the foundation to see who it was, and saw no one. Strashno. Calm, the steps died down. We crawled out of the basement and saw that the gate was closed. The house has been completed. My brother's wife says that the cat periodically arches and hisses at someone, and the dog freezes and looks carefully at one point.